Good morning and welcome to another BVI Finance Breakfast Forum. Thank you for joining us. I am Elise Donovan for BVI Finance. Today we continue the third session in conjunction with the Information System Security Association on cyber security. Today's topic, the cyber kill chain, a business perspective. Our speakers will delve more deeply into helping us understand cyber attacks to be able to drive improvements in corporate defense and operations. Over the past decade, we have seen the escalation globally on cyber threats, stolen data, ransomware, and a host of other issues related to our increasing use of technology. Cybercrime is the world's $6 trillion headache. Cyber criminal activity is one of the biggest challenges that humanity will face in the next 2 decades. It is estimated to have cost the world's businesses and consumers $6 trillion in 2021 alone. And this will rise to more than $10 trillion by 2025. Joining us today are 2 members of the Information System Security Association, Jennifer Potter and Gregory Lemon, to talk about the cyber kill chain, a business perspective. But first, let me tell you about Jennifer and Greg, very distinguished speakers for today. Jennifer Potter is a business executive with extensive business experience in modernizing operations for high-impact financial services business. Her qualifications includes master's degree in law and finance, as well as program certifications in fintech and regulatory innovation, blockchain strategy, and digital money. Jennifer also holds international qualifications in governance, risk and compliance, and business continuity management. She is notably skilled at strategy development and execution, business resilience, and digital transformation. Jennifer joined the Information System Security Association in 2017 and is an active member of the BVI chapter. Gregory Lemon is a co-founder of Ubiquity Limited. He is an infrastructure and cloud solutions architect on Microsoft Windows and Azure platforms, and an information security system professional with experience working across multiple industries from finance to utilities throughout the Caribbean. He consults and conducts trainings on disaster recovery, network infrastructure design, and implementation, cloud solutions, and information security. Gregory believes in continuous education, as is evidenced by his numerous technology industry qualifications he has earned over the years. And these include, but are not limited to, Microsoft Security Compliance and Identity, Microsoft and Office 365 Certified Information System Security Professional Certified, Cloud Security Knowledge Certified Business Resilience Manager, Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer specializing in security and messaging, and Microsoft Certified Trainer, and he is also CompTIA's Security Plus certification. Please help me welcome for the third in the cybersecurity system, very distinguished Jennifer Potter and Gregory Lemon. Jennifer and Greg, I invite you now to open your mics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elise. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we're going to be having a conversation this morning about the cyber kill chain, as Elise so wonderfully introduced us both. And as we start, we've seen this. So this is really a conversation that Jennifer and I are having, and we're inviting you to take part and to walk away with something from the conversation that helps your organizations improve its operational defensive measures, and of course, continue to operate and to be more cyber resilient. So Jennifer, are you ready?
I am ready, Greg. Let's go.
So what are some of the considerations, Jennifer, about operations risk and cyber risk in relation to, you know, taking on the whole idea of making sure your organization is protected and continues to be protected, not so much from the technical level, but from the executive and management level?
Well, Greg, today, hopefully our conversation will give our guests some insight on governance as it relates to cyber risk. Cyber risk is a newer or emerging discipline, but given the prevalence of the risk, it's a critical area for every executive and business leader, and particularly for firms in the financial services sector. Like all other business risks, it must be integrated into your business strategy and be a part of regular decision-making. Of course, with the responsibility of governing risk comes the requirement to adequately fund mitigating that risk. And we know that there's the acceptance that protecting information assets can be costly. And cyber risk, I think most importantly for executives and business leaders to recognize and acknowledge that cyber risk is not an IT role, it's not IT discipline. Information is as valuable as currency to an organization, and it ought to be treated that way.
All right. So against that backdrop, we are going to look at what we call the cyber kill chain and delve into the cyber kill chain and expand on it and also talk about, you know, talk around the concerns of the board and executive and management concerns in terms of an approach that makes that takes a cyber kill chain and makes it useful. So let's start with the obvious question. What is the cyber kill chain? So this and I'll kick this off by jumping in here. The cyber kill chain really is so the cyber kill chain is a 7-phase attack methodology that was really discovered by Lockheed Martin cybersecurity division, and they established this model back in 2011. And what this model does is it looks at the phases that an attacker, so we're going to use some terms here. Attacker, threat actor, bad actor, we all mean the same thing. These are people who don't have your best interest at heart as an organization or as an individual or as a government agency. And so we're going to walk through the seven phases of the cyber kill chain, Lockheed Martin's cyber kill chain, throughout this presentation. And so this is a graphic, but in reality, a word about the kill chain in reality is this is what it looks like. Attacks are not always linear. Successful attacks can take years, months, days, weeks, or minutes. And we've seen this. One of the important things to note, though, is that every time an attacker gains a new level, they go right back to what we call the reconnaissance stage. And we're going to talk about recon more and more. But the important thing is every time they move deeper within an attack phase, they go back, they look around, they see what new ground is. It's pretty much like a military campaign. And Jen, of course, given what's happening on a global scale, this is a very timely conversation, isn't it?
Definitely.
So let's jump a little bit more. So one of the important things to note is and when we think about attacks, we generally, or when we hear about them, we are hearing about phases 6 and 7, or more likely phase 7, when everything has happened. But phase 3, 4, and 5 is really where a lot of the action happens that involves, you know, the target systems. And we're going to talk about this some more as well. So Jen, shall we begin by talking about reconnaissance and looking at what reconnaissance entails?
Yeah, Greg, that would be very useful for our audience because, as you say, most of the time what you will hear is at the end of the incident, when the incident then becomes public. The news media or other sources might tell everybody what has been happening, but that company has been under the reconnaissance of threat actors for some time. And it's important for our audience to recognize what they can do ahead of it and not to make anybody paranoid, but to always assume that you are being looked at and that somebody is trying to infiltrate your organization, and taking the steps really to understand how that happens, what it might look like, so that you and your employees are prepared.
Right. So while we're not trying to scare anyone, a little bit of paranoia is probably a good thing.
Healthy.
All right. So in the recon stage, this is actually where the threat actors are. This is pretty much one of the two most passive stages of the kill chain. So what the threat actors are doing here is, they are essentially, think of a burglar casing someone's house. They drive past, they look, they study what the target is doing, that's the target's habits. And this is really what happens in the recon stages of an attack. It is that they are pretty much just looking at what's happening. Isn't that so, Jen?
That is so. And sometimes a company might make itself an easy target just by what it's sharing. And sometimes it's very innocent. You might have branded your, not to go technical, you may have branded your security access cards. Lots of companies use those for people to enter the office.
Yes, yes.
A plain one means if somebody finds it or is standing behind your employee in a line, they don't know where that person works necessarily. But the minute you've branded that card, then people start to pay attention. So suppose a threat actor is looking and now you are a target because they recognize that they can identify your key card. And so they know when they've seen or found somebody who's using that card. And lots of other examples, particularly with employees being online and your online persona and so on. So let's get into reconnaissance, Greg.
All right, so you gave some examples, and let's give a little bit more of the examples, and so that we can explain and of course, ease the listeners some of the listeners perspective. During the recon stage, the attackers, the threat actors, are not interacting with your organization's assets as yet, so they are not attacking. It's really passive, and it's fairly simple. It's browsing your website, it's looking at your website, it's looking at your social media profile, it's looking at posts. Companies are always writing and posting articles. So it's looking at the articles that companies are writing and that companies are posting online, and also individuals. Government agencies, of course, are a big part of this. One of the ways that a lot of data is given out, and as you mentioned, Jennifer, the key card situation. Another way is job postings for IT positions. We've seen where companies, and the truth is companies cannot really avoid this, because they want the best persons, and they want persons to know what they're getting involved in terms of the technology platform. I mean, that's how you essentially attract top talent. Are there any more examples you want to throw in here, Jennifer?
In terms of reconnaissance, really, Greg, it can be anything. And like you said, you don't want to hamstring your organization so that you're not able to share on social media. Right. Or you're so restricted your employees that they can be brand ambassadors. But you really want to think about the quality of what you're sharing, how you're sharing. And it helps just to have someone monitoring what's being shared and seeing if they can identify any additional risk from what's being shared online.
Right. And this is pretty much one of which we talk about attackers downloading documents, and you might be wondering, what can they get from downloading a document? But if you look at just this very quick example of a Word document I was playing around with, you can see where there's a blacked out line, and this actually indicates where this document is saved on either my PC or on my company's network. And then if you look across to where you see the computer, that's the computer name. And if you have a naming convention within your organization, then attackers are able to essentially infer what the naming convention for the rest of the devices in your organization is going to be like. And they then can start building a real profile. The whole idea of the recon stage is to build so perfect a profile of the target that they pretty much can move to the next stage very easily and very quickly. But before we get to that, how does this affect an organization, Jen?
Well, the thing is, once you have stuff in the public space and people are checking you out, threat actors are checking you out, like you said, it's very easy for them to say, well, if this particular document has this computer name on it, then I can infer that maybe they're numbering them sequentially. There's another computer that says 26 and not 25. We don't want to get into too many technical terms, but know that your senior executives and your board members are going to be particularly targeted. And while there's a lot of training, which we encourage and see about email phishing, know that there's also a term called whaling, where threat actors are going after the most senior persons in the organizations because they know that those are the ones with access, regular access to the very best, if you will, of the information assets. So your CFO is going to be targeted, your CEO, your board members. And so you want to make sure that, you know, you're sharing their email addresses. So you want to make sure that your protection for their email boxes is at its highest level. And you want to chat about this and make sure your policies talk about this so that they are aware why they're getting the extra attention.
Right. And some of the direct impact to organizations, you know, it's leakage of data. And we saw that from that example of, you know, pulling down a document, looking at the document properties. And of course, you know, the ultimate is regulatory fines by virtue of a breach, customer data exposure, you know, loss of customer confidence, and of course, loss of business. And now we can talk a little bit more about how these can give a bit more advice on about how these organizations can help themselves. What can they do? And as we've been talking a lot about, Jennifer, policies. You know, the creation of easy to understand and easy to implement policies. You mentioned it, driving awareness of, you know, what is shared and how it is shared. And so these are a couple of starting points for organizations to help defend and protect themselves, you know, during the recon stage. But Jen, let's talk about what are some of the board and executive concerns that come to bear at this stage of the kill chain.
Well, Greg, again, you know, want to drive home the point that this is not an IT issue. This is a real enterprise-wide strategic issue in terms of managing governance around risk, cyber risk in particular. First thing, if we start on the wheel and go clockwise on governance issue, you want to educate your board on the risk landscape. Your board has to be engaged, has to be involved. We understand that cyber and expertise on cyber is not traditional management discipline, but it's time, it's prevalent. The board has to be engaged, they have to be aware, they have to be educated, and you need to drive home the point that the board has to ratchet up its awareness of the risk that the company faces because of cyber threats and how it's best poised to assist management and to help mitigate those risks. In terms of compliance, you want to evaluate both the legal and the regulatory implications for the risk that you're facing. If you have obligations to your regulator to provide or to keep certain information, then make sure that you have done what is necessary to ensure that you're capturing and securing and keeping that information safe to avoid, as you say, the reputational fallout and the loss of revenue, as well as the fines, which can be significant. You want to monitor as best you can, have a monitoring mechanism for the organization so that regulatory development and best practices, you're able to integrate them quickly into your processes and procedures. As far as business continuity, I think one of the easy misses is to define both at the board and the management level, define clearly who has ownership of cyber risk. You do not want to figure this stuff out when you've already been breached and everybody is stressed and fingers start going in different directions. You want to identify early and clearly who has ownership for the cyber risk.
Right. I do like the point you made that cyber security is not IT.
It's like definitely not. You're talking about information assets, and while your IT team is very knowledgeable, has some information about security and can, if you will, put the moat around the castle, that's not it. everybody has to be involved with regards to cyber risk and cybersecurity, because it's your information, and IT is not the one storing and sharing and collaborating on information or making decisions about what strategy the business is going to use, how to introduce new products and services. So definitely it's a more well-rounded approach that business has to take with regards to governance of information. In terms of security, I spoke about the idea of a moat. You want to have the basic technical safeguards in place. You're going to speak to your technology team about this. Make sure you have the firewalls, you have the acceptable use policies for your devices. That's a big one. But you want to make sure that there's independent review of internal controls. It's not one and done. You don't set it and forget it. Your risks are changing. The probability that you're going to be breached changes regularly, and you want to stay updated on those things. Policies. I don't know how much more we can emphasize that, yes, Greg, but yes, it's important. If it matters, you have to measure it. And if it's important for you to manage risk, then you need to put the policies in place that address the risks that are specific to your company. It's all well and good to get there are lots of useful templates online for policies that the company should have. The key there is, after you've downloaded a template, you need to make sure that you revise it so it makes sense for your organization, the way you do business and the way you make decisions. At the center of the circle, protect your environment, prevent loss of data, and prepare for being attacked.
Thank you, Jen. That was a very thorough going through. And we want to continue a little bit more and talk a bit more about board and executive actions. And so, Jen, I invite you to expand on this some more. You talk about considering IT and information. You talk about acceptable use policy. And you talk about setting and managing risk, looking at the governance aspect of it. But what are some of the concrete actions that a board can take here? I see you have adopt cybersecurity framework, which is actually one that we are looking at now, the kill chain. And I see you have talent to implement strategy. So you're talking about hiring, and of course, open and robust controls with communications with management. So you're talking now that technologists need to be able to not just talk tech, but to also talk business and to talk risk management. Isn't that what you're saying here? I mean, that's what I'm getting from this.
I think that's a perfect way to capture it, Greg. There's no longer, the best run organizations will no longer have IT in a box and leadership in another box and risk in another box. Everybody has to come together. There's no way to effectively protect the organization from the threats that it faces and to prepare for having a resilient organization, which is important because you're not talking only about your ability to deny a threat actor access to your environment. You have to work on the assumption that you're going to be breached, and you hope that that breach is going to be insignificant. But you have to operate on the assumption that you will be breached. And so what you're trying to do is to minimize the impact that that breach will have on the sustainability of your organization and its ability to survive that breach. You want to set a risk appetite. How much risk are you willing to take? And it is not an exact science, but it helps if you say, well, this particular part of the business is super important to us. And so this is the one where we're going to allocate the majority of resources that we've identified, because you've gone through the exercise of creating a risk register and knowing what the business impact is of each risk. As an example, some organizations will use their website for more than a brochure. So that website then becomes a strategic asset. If you are using your website only as a brochure, so it has your opening hours, the services you provide, not transactions, then it's less strategic an asset to you. And so if an attacker denies you access to your website, it's not the end of the world. But for other companies, think an e-commerce company, for example, to take the example to an extreme, denial of service of access to your website means something catastrophic for your business and for your ability to continue to earn revenue. So perhaps a company that is using its website only as a brochure is able to take a lower security posture with regards to the risk that is posed to that website and what the consequences would be. If the site isn't available, you might be able to just use your email and tell your clients, our site is down, or site, whatever, but that doesn't stop your business. In contrast, if you are using email to contact your clients to do everything, then your email is a prime target and it's one that you should allocate the lion's share of resources to making sure it's as secure as you can be. If you're communicating with clients primarily via email and you're sending unencrypted emails with sensitive information, you're asking for trouble. So you figure out how to encrypt those emails and how to protect yourself and your client. Board reports, effectiveness. It's not enough to just tell the board how much you're spending on security or what you need money for. You need to be providing information on the effectiveness of the measures. It's a resource allocation game. If you want the board to support spending more money on security, then show them how it's valuable to the organization and show them how what you're doing in the security space is effective and protecting the organization. And that speaks to the next point of being able to get support and funding for your cybersecurity spend. The IT and information security assets are different, and certainly for governance, they should be treated that way. One of the key things, and this is maybe not every board, but certainly an executive management scenario, have pre-incident reviews of your resources and coverage. You don't want to figure out what to do after you've been attacked. If you are going to be breached financially and then you're going to call the bank trying to figure out how to stop money from moving or recover it or lock down somebody who shouldn't have access to your bank account, pick up the phone today and speak to your bank and figure out who you need to make those reports to. How quickly are you going to get assistance? Because at the time when you've already been breached and you see money leaving your account, you don't want to be transferred to 3 or 4 different people trying to figure out how to get that process started. So speak to your financial institution, speak to your regulator, find out from them, what do I need to do if I've been breached? What do you expect to happen? Because you want to know ahead of time, put it in your incident plans, which you're going to have, and make sure that you're in the best position to get out of this threat successfully.
Sounds good. So we've fully explored or thoroughly explored the recon stage. So I guess the next stage is going to talk about the weaponization.
Take us to weaponization, Greg.
All right. So the threat actors, the bad guys, the attackers, they've cased your joint. They've collected all the information they need. They've built an amazing profile of you. So what do they do next? Well, next they take this data and you get a built, not to order, but you could say a built to order malicious piece of software. This data is customized specifically to attack you, to attack your network. If it's a government, to attack a particular government agency. And, they go through their quality assurance phase where they actually simulate how they can best attack you. And of course, Jen, we talk about malicious software, we talk about recon, and we talk about, you mentioned something about risk appetite and risk appetite driving investment. This now moves more into that area of having created a malicious software, having created the malware, they're ready to look at how best to attack you. And of course, we obviously are going to talk about some of the examples, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the things to remind our audience, Greg, is that this process, the chain, the steps in the kill chain, can be as short as minutes or days, but it can be as long as months. You could be under reconnaissance now and not be aware because nothing has been weaponized yet.
And they're not interacting with your organization in an active way yet. Mm-hmm. And so some of the examples, and comes back to what we were talking about. A lot of the times when you read about a breach, we may read that it happened because a phishing email link was clicked on or some document was, but the whole idea is they are looking at the best way to attack you, and they are looking at the ways that are most effective, the highest chances of success. And so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, PDF, they hide the malicious software in these documents, sneak it past your defenses. And of course, it only really takes one person clicking on something to get the ball rolling in terms of an active attack. Compromised websites became an amazing tool of threat actors for a few years. It's decreasing now, but we used to call these compromised websites like a watering hole. Think of the watering hole in the attacks where the gate is lurking just below the surface. So these things happen. Hidden malware hidden in videos and images. We share a lot of data now on our mobile devices, WhatsApp, Telegram, all of these things. And a lot of the time, malware is actually hidden in a lot of those images. Why nothing happens is because the images are being shared on a platform that the malware was not customized for. So a malware customized for a Windows PC or a Windows tablet will not get triggered if you run it on an Android phone. And so, but given the fact that we now have WhatsApp web and Telegram web, and a lot of these messaging services now have a web interface. Hey, guess what happens when you open it and on your PC using one of these mediums? And USB. So these are examples of what they weaponize. The USB drives being loaded and sent. I mean, there have been incidents where attackers print logos of legitimate companies on USB drives and just leave them in the lobbies of hotels and of organizations, and people just pick up a USB drive and move with it. We are getting a little bit more sensitive and security aware to this, but this still happens. So we're going to look next at how can this impact me or my organization, and if successfully delivered, and if successfully triggered, then what happens is a foothold setup is created where the attackers gain an initial foothold in your organization, and it could be through a system, and a system is not necessarily a computer. A system could be an application, and from there, of course, they expand throughout your network. This can also lead to data theft and our equipment destruction. Now, the lower right corner has a reminder that this is still a phase where they are not yet interacting with your organization. This is really the phase where they are getting ready to interact with your organization. And so we're going to talk a little bit now about some of the things that can be done in terms of preparing here. And policy creation, that word again. Jen, you mentioned acceptable use policy. I don't think we can flag this too much, but policy creation. Policies dictate how you interact with your systems, how you interact with organizations, and also how your organization interact with the world at large, your customers, your clients, your partners. So policy, acceptable use policy. How do you use the technology? How does your business use the technology securely and reliably to conduct business? Regular security awareness training. Jennifer, we can't talk about this too much. Regular. So we were talking about this earlier, and we were saying that one of the things that hackers, threat actors secretly relish, one of their secrets is it is easier to attack a human being than a well-configured system. It is always easier to attack and hack a human being than a well-configured system. And this is where security awareness training plays a big part. How do you protect your key card? How do you protect your devices that you're using to make remote connections back to the organization? Are you keeping them safe? Oh, and we were talking about this, Jen, about when you talk about acceptable use policy. When you take home company assets, a company laptop, and it's a multi-person, it's a family setting, do you log on and then hand the laptop to your family member to, check Gmail, check Hotmail, Outlook.com. Do you allow them to jump on and check Facebook and all these things? What does your policy, your acceptable use policy, says about these things? And having explored this a bit, Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about the board and executive concerns here. What are some of the board and executive concerns? What can the board do here in terms of helping to drive this?
Well, one of the things is the board should insist on the team having and testing an incident response plan. You want to have your traditional BCP has probably covered natural disasters, is probably been updated now for a health pandemic. Make sure there's something in there about cyber threats. And
we want to hope that it's been updated for the pandemic, right?
We hope so. And now make sure that there's a response plan in place for if you've been hit by a cyber incident or a cyber threat. It has to be there. The board should know what the response plan looks like, because that's going to have bearing on whether they are doing their due diligence and meeting their fiduciary responsibility, but also how is the organization going to be able to recover? And in terms of governance, the board should be concerned about how is the organization managing the human and technical mitigation techniques. It's one thing to have your firewalls and all these fancy monitoring tools, right, and services in place, but how are you using them? I think here of the Target example. Target, yes, the department store in the US, Target had a lot of resources available to it, had security protocols in place. Doesn't mean that you can't be hacked. They were compromised, but part of the issue with Target is that even though the systems were telling the people who should have been monitoring those systems that something was wrong, they chose to ignore it and to have delayed responses. That could be catastrophic for your organization. So the board wants to make sure that the tools that they've invested in are being used correctly and that the monitoring is happening as it should happen. And as part of that responsibility, then call for cyber audits. Regularly do this to discharge your responsibility as an executive or as a board member. Do the audits and make sure things are working and are happening as they should be. Are plans being updated? Is this particular monitoring tool being observed or monitored or what have you? Make it clear what is to happen if there's a threat or an incident, because the plan has to go far enough to say, this is what we do. If there's an incident and it's evaluated to be this type of threat, this is what happens first or next or whatever in terms of continuity. How do you protect the parts of the organization that haven't yet been exposed so that there's no cross-contamination? How do you advise your stakeholders so that they know that you've been compromised and to protect themselves or to look at their environments? And then the big one here, Greg, is policies again, because the board is not doing it itself. This is now left to your management team, your security officer, your technology people, your legal department. Everybody kind of has to get their hands in and work at this. But evaluate the practices of your vendors before you establish your relationship. If these vendors are critically important vendors to you, you want to know what their cyber defenses are. Because if you're depending on a third-party vendor to provide you a service that needs 99% uptime, and they are not protecting themselves, then they can't be available to you and they possibly could stop your business. I know you and I talked about a grocery chain in Sweden, I believe it is. They were not compromised, yes, but they ended up having to close 500 locations because their point of sales software provider was compromised and had that knock-on effect on their business. So, evaluate your vendors carefully. Sometimes the decision can't be to go with the cheapest vendor. It has to be, how is this vendor supporting me? And what risks do I have by using this vendor?
Right. So cybersecurity is really a team sport, both internally and externally, because
Oh, definitely.
you mentioned, several departments being involved in this. So it's really not that you hire a single person and you say, hey, go off and protect my systems.
Correct.
It's a team sport that comes from the top all the way down, is what you're saying. And
Everybody
you
has
talk
to be
about risk.
involved.
Yes, and you talk about risk and risk management, and risk. I go back to risk appetite, and of course, you're talking about assessing the critical aspects of the business, the critical areas, to see where where you need to put the most money in terms of what you're talking about. I think there is a quote that says, "What gets measured improves, and what gets measured and reported improves exponentially."
Correct.
So
If it matters, measure it.
Yes, agreed. So we've talked about some of the board and executive concerns. What are some of the board and executive actions that we can rule into from concerns? Because if you're
Yeah,
concerned, then you want to take action, don't you?
definitely. We rolled into some of this before. Treat your confidential and sensitive data like it's currency. You know what that data is. It changes from company to company, but that information that is so critical to continuing your business, the information that helps you provide value or gives you the opportunity to provide new value, that's the information that you want to treat like it's currency. If it's cash, you wouldn't leave it lying around. If the information is that valuable, you do the same thing. You lock it away, you protect it from persons that shouldn't have access to it, et cetera, et cetera. For the board should ask, but for the technical persons who are putting together security proposals, help your board quantify what the anticipated reduction in risk will be. Don't go and ask for $200,000 and just accept that they need to spend this money. Try to quantify. If we install this or if we do this, we will reduce the risk of a threat via email by 20%. That kind of information is valuable to your board level executives and will help them make the decisions to support the resources that you need for cybersecurity management. Engaging stakeholders ahead of the incident. We talked about engaging your bank before to understand what you need to do. Same thing if you are insured against cyber risk, talk to your insurer and find out what you need to do to make a claim or how you need to report incidents, or maybe sometimes they will have some information on how to reduce the risks or how to better benefit from your cyber policies. Share cyber incidents to increase awareness. I think sometimes we leave the board out of this conversation, so you will have awareness campaigns targeting your employees. And if there are cybersecurity incidents that happen generally, not to your company, you also want to share that with your board. It gives them some insight into what they could possibly be exposed to. I think a couple of months ago, there was a story I shared about a company where in the kill chain, Greg, this was a long threat. The company that was eventually targeted, how they were targeted is an employee was befriended by a threat actor at the gym and became friends, and they started exchanging information about workouts and recipes and so on. And then that threat actor sent the employee an email at their work email with recipes, which the employee opened because this person is now an acquaintance, they're a friend, and they're sending me an email, and that triggered the incident for that company. And so that was a long game. They found an employee who was at risk, and they befriended that employee and made it easy for that employee to open an email from the threat actor.
Easier to hack a human.
Share those stories so people understand that it's not paranoia, but it's about being prepared.
Right. It goes back to what I was saying. Attackers. This is one of their secret beliefs. It is easier to hack a human than to hack a well-configured system. So we've explored phases 1 and 2, where it's outside of your systems, and now we move to look at phase 3, where now the attackers start interacting with your system. And as you just said, Jennifer, you mentioned, you know, they sent a recipe to the target, and that's what we're going to talk about next: the delivery of malicious software, malware, as we call it. So at this stage, so they've done the recon, they've crafted and customized the best ways to attack you, and they are not going to use a single, what we call vector, or a single avenue of attack. They are going to use multiple avenue of attack to increase the likelihood of success. And so in phase 3, this is where you start getting the emails. This is where you actually, you know, a USB drive left in the lobby of your organization. You know, this is where they may even hack your website and put malicious code there for you to visit. And this is also where they look at where you go most often in terms of your browsing habits. And of course, you know, they will hack those websites and put code there just for you. I mean, the code will attack others, but they are looking specifically for you. And some of the examples, Jennifer, that we mentioned earlier, you know, phishing emails, you know, infected attachments, links that download malware, online chat services. So I want to make a note here. As much as we talk about online chat services, what has been happening is the online chat services providers, they have been introducing security measures in their chats that essentially will remove malicious links. Will also, they've started removing malicious documents or documents with malicious payload. So it's not all bad. They are catching up, and I mean there's a lot at risk there for them as well. Office documents sent via email, documents on USB drive. You talk about visiting an infected website, but the last example here is a big one, because a lot of us use free Wi-Fi at your favorite coffee shop, free Wi-Fi at your favorite cafe, free Wi-Fi at your favorite restaurant, and malicious threat actors know this. And so what they will often do is, you know, they will set up a malicious access point. And it's open and it's free, and it will have almost the same name. And a lot of the times they will just stack on a 1 or a 2, you know, and you know, you fire up your device, it scans this. Oh, this Wi-Fi is open, it's free. Click, you connect, and then you start exchanging a lot of your data. And of course, they are there just watching your data going across, collecting information, and you know, it's pretty much game over. One of the things that we want to note though, before we go further, is a disruption at any phase in the kill chain can stop a malicious attack or slow it down and give you the opportunity to start responding. This is where you trigger your incident response plan. And our colleagues, or ISA colleagues, spoke about this a few weeks ago when they spoke about incident response. This is where you would be doing some of the things, or all of the things that they spoke about back then. But once you detect it, you know, once you detect any activity and you start disrupting that, then you have a better fighting chance. So let's talk a little bit, Jen, about how this can impact me, the individual, if I'm the target, or the organization. You know, we know successful delivery, it will lead to a foothold, and of course, eventually, you know, in some cases, or in many cases, long-term presence of the threat actors in your computer network, and this could be long-term undetected presence. That is their ideal. That's what they're going after. You know, it can lead to, of course, data theft. I mean, a compromise. Once they're inside, they can do these things: steal data, damage equipment, of course, loss of business. I mean, once detected, if it comes out, you know, can lead to regulatory fines, and things like that. But Jen, let's talk a little bit about what can be done here from first the operational perspective, and then we're going to look at the board and executive concerns. You know, you mentioned basic defenses like firewalls and things like that. And I mean, these are some of the typical things without going too deep into the weeds of the technicalities, but, a basic firewall, which is a piece of equipment, not just the software, in place, anti-malware solution. And this anti-malware solution is a presentation in and of itself. And training your team, having a team that is trained, having an IT asset, and of course, we did say this is a team sport, cybersecurity, but you want people who know what to do, who know what they're doing and what they're looking for and how to respond. And of course, systems, patching your systems, making sure that your systems are properly patched, properly updated. This is also something that your IT team will be doing and should be doing on a regular basis. But having spoken a bit about the operational aspect of it, Jen, let's talk some more about the board and executive concerns.
Yeah, I think it's being a bit repetitive at this point, Greg, but it's just to hammer home, determine what key actions will be at whatever point. So again, it's important what your plan contains, that it's an adequate plan, because if your plan relies on person A being in place and that person is not there, what happens?
Right.
What are the key actions that will need to be taken if critical personnel are unavailable? And, plan for that eventuality as well. If your information security person is sick or unavailable or on a plane somewhere and something happens, what do you do? Everybody needs to prepare for that. And so your plan needs to be very comprehensive in terms of things going wrong, because they will. What's going to be a staffing model for IT security? Is it going to be a hybrid? Are you managing it all in-house? Is it going to be outsourced? The board wants to be aware of this because it helps them ask the right questions to understand the level of preparedness and to understand the effectiveness of the measures that management has in place. In terms of continuity, I would say best case scenario, pre-draft those incident response messages. You do not want to be schlepping around a 4-sentence communications to legal to get their okay when things are popping off. You've been breached. Your clients are upset and calling. Your regulator wants to know what's going on in the organization. Your shareholders are upset. Your board has questions, and you are trying to work out messaging. Try to pre-draft some of those messages. Make sure they're in place, and you think about what needs to be said and to whom, especially where there's high impact to the organization, because you don't want to be, schlepping around those messages, trying to get consensus on what to say and what words to use. In this age of social media, somebody will out the incident before you have a chance to respond the way you want to. So while you are working out your messaging, somebody will already have put on social media that a company has been compromised. You'll have the media calling you, et cetera, et cetera. The plans need to be solid, but they also need to be constantly under revision. If key business activities or key personnel change, your plan probably needs to be updated. So make sure somebody's paying attention to that, and test your incident response regularly. A good rule of thumb would be, if a company that has the same characteristics as yours in terms of size or the business they're in or the type of clients they serve are compromised, take that scenario and run through it with your plan and see how you would fare. It's not enough to kind of sit on the side, say, oh, wow, they got hit. They got hit, but it's time for you to take some preemptive action to make sure that you're not going to suffer the same fate. So take their scenario and run it through and see how well would your plan have performed in the same scenario.
Thank you, Jen. And let's talk a little bit about the actions that the board and the executive can take. I mean, what are some of the things that they should be looking to do?
Regular briefings, that's a quick one. Gets everybody comfortable with the risk conversation. It helps to diffuse the expertise in the organization, make sure that everybody's learning from everybody else. Consider adding external resources if you don't have the internal expertise. avoid speaking jargon and speak business value to your board and executives. You're going to lose them if you're talking, highly technical language. The language that your board and your executive understands is the language of business value. And so your conversations about risk and security need to be framed in that way. And constantly review how you move, share, secure, and store information. If you are putting sensitive information in Excel spreadsheets, sharing it around the office, sending it to people via email, somebody sending it to their private email because it got too big and the server is stopping it. Listen, executives in particular are probably some of the worst offenders when it comes to going outside security policies. If the policies are not working for the business, raise your hand, raise a discussion in the executive team so that the policies can be aligned with how you want to do business. But the minute you're going to not comply or go around the policies, you're increasing the risk to the organization.
Oh, so the executives themselves will write the policies and then circumvent them.
Well, yes, in the name of
expediency
business, but it adds risk. So, work with your team to figure out how to make the policies work for how you need to do business, but don't just simply circumvent them because they add to the risk.
Right. And I see you have yours, CIO and CISO. And let's break it out just quickly for our audience. So a CIO is a Chief Information Officer. And
Correct.
this would be an IT manager, but higher up. So it's a C-suite executive.
This is a C-suite executive. This is somebody who makes decisions about your information, how the information is stored, who can have access to it. So this whole idea of sharing it, securing it, granting access to it, that's the information officer, the whole data management piece.
Right. So your IT manager would be reporting to this person, and this person would be reporting and sitting in meetings with the CFO, the COO, the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I see you have CISO, which is Chief Information Security Officer. So you're talking about now having essentially two persons at the C-suite that are governing our overall for IT and cybersecurity, but they're not necessarily the same persons.
Not necessarily the same person. And obviously having a full-time CISO or CIO depends on the size of the organization, the complexity of the business that they are managing. But you want to think even in the smallest organizations, even if you don't have those titles and don't have the resources for those as independent persons, you need to think about who is doing that work, who is taking care of those responsibilities, because the need for that insight doesn't go away just because you're too small to have an independent CISO. Somebody has to be responsible. And the buck stops with the MD if there is not a named person. So you need to figure out who is going to play that role. Who is going to be making decisions about information and how it's shared, even internally, because if you have everybody having access to all your high value information, it increases the risk that there's going to be some threat or breach to the information.
Oh, wow. All right, great. So let's talk about the next phase, because now we've delivered the malware. Let's talk about the next phase. What happens after it's been delivered? What happens after it gets to the email, the phishing email has made it past the systems, the defense systems. Somebody has taken up that USB drive, they've plugged it in. It comes to the phase for what we call exploitation, right? And examples of exploitation is the code gets triggered, the link is clicked on, the attachment gets downloaded, the malware gets downloaded, it gets run. There is a vulnerable system somewhere that and remember, when we say system, we are not just talking about devices. It could be a vulnerable web application. You alluded earlier, Jen, about companies that use their website for more than just a brochure. So you're talking about companies that have some sort of processing where you do something on the website and it touches something back inside the organization's network. We're talking about those systems being unpatched. You mentioned executives circumventing some of the policies. So it's everyday users who have been able to convince IT to bump their everyday user account up to the admin so that they can install stuff without having to constantly call IT. And it's these users who when they click on something, it triggers and it gets run in the background. So they are not prompted. There's no prompt to say, hey, this application is trying to change your system or install something on your system. It's those users that we are talking about. Bring your own device. Again, you know, this became a big thing, and then IT people started snickering and calling and changing the last word in this to bring your own disaster, because of, you know, the lack of full control of corporate of equipment that is accessing, you know, the corporation. So we talk about a lot of these things, and these are examples of you know, how exploitation happens, or the avenues through which exploitation happens. And of course, you know, how does this impact the organization? Well, successful exploitation pretty much leads to the threat actor, you know, moving more comfortably throughout your network, and preferably for them undetected. Again, the better our defenses, and the more we can detect something, you know, and disrupt any phase in the kill chain, the better it is for us. And of course, you know, this can lead to, you know, a complete compromise of the network. But what can be done here? So first, you know, policies. Again, you know, policies, how you use stuff. Policies about how things are accessed. Of course, procedures. What happens here, what happens there, you know, malicious email, something prompts you, what do you do? Do you cancel and click, you know, forward to your IT service provider or your IT team? You know, how your incident response gets triggered. And incident response does not necessarily have to be something big. It could be something really small. But how does it get triggered? Is anyone able to trigger it? And who do they go to? Who do they talk to? What are the steps? Of course, periodic, you mentioned this in one of your previous slides, and periodic review and testing of the plan or the plans, you know, reviewing and testing them, going back over them to ensure that the team, and of course the plan has to be executed by a team, that the team members all know their place, their position, and know what their responsibilities are. And how, I mean, just like how we have the kill chain, which is a series of phases, then your incident response plan should likewise be a series of phases. So having gone through this, Jen, what are some, at this point, there are some executive concerns here, because, you know, if executives are part of the team and they may also be culpable, you know, responsible for the exploitation, what are some of the concerns for them?
Yeah, executives definitely have a part in adding risk by not fully complying with policies, or by carving out their own exceptions to security policies, which is, you know, it's a dangerous practice. Try to work with your organization to make it work for your business. At this point, if you've been exploited, you know, if you have your policies and your procedures, if you have your plans, hopefully it's not complete panic and chaos in your organization. You're starting to put your plan into action. You've already done some groundwork, and so you know how to respond. And at the very least, you're prepared. And, you know, part of this issue of continuous preparation and re-examination is assessing your plans and the progress against your plans, and meaningful KPIs. We keep talking about this issue of measuring. You have to measure. So what are your performance indicators? Have you stopped XYZ number of threats? Tell your board, help them feel involved in taking the mitigating the threats, and seeing how their support for the investments is translating into a better organization or a more secure organization. make sure at the executive level, if not at the board level, but certainly at the executive level, get cybersecurity on your meeting agendas, because that conversation among the C-suite executives is where you're going to identify and close gaps. If you are not having the conversation with your CFO in the room so that he can hear the business risk and he can chime in with the support and so on, and you can hear from your ops people, then you're missing opportunities to really, align the organization around being prepared.
Right.
Third-party contracts we talked about already, carefully monitoring your security tools to take action. And yes, your security awareness will be challenged by cultural norms. Here we're talking about the company's culture, Be prepared for that and figure out how you're going to work around those things.
Right. So having talked about this, let's jump into the next phase, which is, almost the instantaneous phase of installation. So at this point, your systems have been exploited. Threat actors have some sort of a foothold and control. And what the threat actors move to do now is to install additional tools. So, initial compromise is only the beginning. And this is where they start to look at how they can stay in your network, right? So and they start that process by installing tools, and examples of the tools is when we say tools, we're talking about software, right? And the tools are really, in most cases, legitimate tools used by IT to provide remote support, to provide remote access. And what the threat actors do at this stage is they modify the tools. To give themselves access to these tools, for them to use the tools. And of course, they also use the tools to compromise other systems to remain in your network and to expand throughout your network. And so how does this impact the organization? So at this stage, they are still not where they want to be, but they are further than where they started. And so now they can do things like destroy data because they have access. They can destroy equipment, they can read sensitive emails, and they can access sensitive information. They can even trigger ransomware to start taking over parts of your organization's corporate networks. And so these are some of the things that happen. But what can be done here? And these are some of the proactive measures. We talk about vulnerability assessment. A vulnerability assessment is where someone, your cyber security team, your cyber security service provider, they are scanning your network or scanning your systems to see where vulnerabilities exist in your systems. And they then will help you to close these vulnerabilities or mitigate them, reduce the risk of how these vulnerabilities can affect you. You can go through threat emulation exercises, otherwise known as pen testing, which is where some people may know it as ethical hacking, but this is where you engage a third party, or even if you have the resources internally, if your internal IT people are trained in this area, they can simulate an attack against your network from inside and from outside to see what happens, how far they can get. And then they can produce a report for the board, for management, and from their management then decide what to give the greatest attention to. Endpoint detection and response. So this is a new area that has popped up over the last few years, and really it is, you know about antivirus. This takes antivirus a step further, where this solution is both human and computer. So it's computer aided and human, computer installed and human aided, where it's actively looking for threats or for anomalous actions on your network. Think of you opening an attachment, a Word document, and it starts doing something in the background. This is a type of software that will look, it knows how Word is supposed to behave, and it will say, okay, this is a Word document that was opened. And then Word does something weird, like it tries to make a connection out to the internet. This is the software that will say, Word is not supposed to be doing that. I need to go have a look over there. And it will create alerts. And in some cases, it may even stop Word from making that connection. It may even, it will stop the document, whether it's Word, Excel, PowerPoint, it will stop the document from doing something that is out of character for what that document is supposed to be doing. Training of users and team members. Of course, again, a well-trained human is one of the best defenses against an attack. Every time, all the time, a very well-trained human is one of the best defenses. And when we talk about training team members and users, we're not just talking about the line staff, but we're talking about from management all the way down in the safe use of the resources, the computing resources that they have. Having gone through that, though, this is from the operations side. Jennifer, let's talk a bit about the board side and what the board and the executive concerns are.
So now we've reached critical areas where the company is being affected, its ability to operate, its ability to serve its clients, to meet stakeholder expectations. All of that is now at risk. Again, yes. The best way is to prepare. You can't always prevent, you can have mitigation measures to protect. The best defense is to prepare. So is your board already having conversations, or have they determined how they will respond to, for example, a ransomware attack? What will be a response? Do you plan to pay? Who is going to engage? Who's going to speak to these threat actors? How are you going to manage this? And if you're saying we will have our legal representatives do this, do they know that? Do your legal representatives know that you expect them to engage on your behalf if you are threatened by ransomware? Because you want to have these conversations. These threats are not cheap. They're going to cost you in reputation. They're going to cost you in lost business. They're going to cost you in lost focus. They may cost you in the ability to operate, or if you have to be shut down for days or weeks at a time. And one of the sobering statistics is that if hit with a significant or serious cyber incident, 40% of companies will not be in business a year out from the incident. That's a high number. That's very sobering, because even if not being in business is the ultimate, then think of the additional burdens and financial implications on your business, even if that nuclear option doesn't happen. So from the board's perspective, consider, are your IT and information security resources adequately trained for the roles and for the level of oversight that your business requires? Remember, we have a continuum here. It's not going to be the same size fix for every company, but think carefully about whether you as a member of the board or the executive feels confident that the training and the level of resource allocation is there to support what you need. Stakeholders.
Jennifer and Greg,
Yes.
we are running out of time. So I just wanted to give our attendees who stayed with us for the last hour and a quarter, an opportunity to ask questions. I know you had like one or two more sections to cover, but if we can just wrap up and allow questions in case people have burning questions. Yes. I certainly do.
Yes, we can wrap up in the next couple of minutes.
Okay.
How about a speed session, Jen?
Go ahead, Greg. You can change slides. Let's talk about the command and control.
All right. So command and control. So from installation to command and control. So they've installed the software that gives them access. Now they really have access. They are pretty much like your systems administrator. So they have access to all of your network. And they can now trigger ransomware as they want. Again, we talk about using legitimate software. And one of the examples is SolarWinds, the SolarWinds incident. When SolarWinds was breached, SolarWinds provides remote access and network security software solutions to private sector and to governments across the world. And they were able to compromise these systems, these software that deliver these systems, which gave them access to thousands of corporations across the world without these corporations knowing. And of course, we talk about, how does this impact your organization? We talk about them having the freedom to move throughout your network in a previous phase. Now they have control of your network and they can do what they want to do, and again, we talk about destroying data or equipment. We talk about reading email and other sensitive information, and we talk about triggering ransomware code. What can be done here? Again, going over some of the same defenses apply throughout the phases, vulnerability assessments, threat emulation exercises, endpoint detection. If any member of your team detects or suspects that something is happening that it shouldn't be happening, then they should be empowered to be able to trigger the incident response plan. So Jennifer, we jump back to you and some board and executive concerns.
Yeah, in the interest of time, Greg, diversify your board, provide training for your entire team, and rinse, repeat.
Right. So we jump now to what we consider the penultimate phase of every cyber attack. When we talk about hands on keyboard, we don't mean hands on your keyboards, but hands on their keyboard, because now they start to take and make active actions within your organization that's now visible to you and in many cases visible to the world. Examples: destroying data, deleting files, stealing data, exposing confidential data. We've seen so many cases of this where threat actors threaten companies that they've infected the companies with a ransomware attack, but in doing so, they've also stolen data, and they're now saying to the companies, pay us to unlock the ransom, the encrypted files, or we'll expose your data, which on many levels, it's a no-win, because you really don't know that they will delete the data or not reinfect you after you've made your payment. And how can this impact the organization? Well, I mean, trigger ransomware, loss of reputation. Jennifer, you talk about going out of business and the 40% number, that really is a high figure. And of course, investigations from your regulators, if you are in a regulated industry, and I think that is expanding beyond just regulated industries now, that lead to huge fines. What can be done? Again, a lot of the same things. Assessments, threat emulation exercise, nothing. Jennifer, one of the things on the slides that you're talking about with executives is prepare. And one of the best ways to prepare is to continually review and carry out exercises against your corporate, your digital assets, so you know where you stand and how you stand. And we wrap this up really with board and executive actions. We talk about security first culture. Jen, take it away.
So your vision, very simply, you want all your employees and your customers to be aware, trained, and behaving in a security first manner, and use your employees. They're the cultural asset that will help you reduce risk.
All right. And of course, biggest impacts of cyber: leadership commitment, adequate funding, and adequate funding is always going to be based on the risk appetite of the organization, the impact assessments of the business units, and of course, understanding information security roles that an organization needs to fill. And our final word, what's next? The cyber kill chain model is not new. It was developed in 2011 by Lockheed Martin, and in tech terms, that is considered mature. It's not the only framework. It's certainly the framework that started this off. There are newer frameworks that incorporate things like insider threats and cloud security. And but the model really is still a very good starting point. It's better than having nothing to go with. And it's a good base reference model that allows an organization to move forward. And Elise, we throw it over to the attendees.
Yes, can we have the attendees place your question? Yes, you will be getting a link to this presentation. It's been very comprehensive, a lot of information. I think it's quite complex in terms of what you presented in terms of the layers, and it's certainly been very informative and excellent, as one of our participants have said. But I know you alluded to it somewhat, but how do smaller organizations, because we have a larger number of smaller organizations in this jurisdiction, and they don't have that, those sophisticated, complex models of organizational structures in place where you have the C-suite level executives, or it's one or two persons carrying out the work, and they also have to take on all these tasks that you have outlined on the chain. So how do they address these issues?
I think, Elise, definitely the recognition that every organization does not have the extensive resources, but still have, and in some cases, additional risk because they don't have the extensive resources. One of the things that companies should get comfortable doing is pooling resources. And it doesn't mean you compromise your business by joining with other businesses that have similar security concerns, maybe have policies worked out, share the cost of developing the policies so that they work for a business of a particular size or in a particular market segment. And it's useful also to share information, and perhaps what we don't have enough of jurisdictionally is this area where you can share your experiences so that the necessary frameworks can be put in place that will benefit firms of a smaller size. Because it's important, for example, if there are surveys for smaller companies, to put their experiences in the surveys and to share their experiences so that there becomes a book or knowledge of best practice that smaller firms can adopt. And there's some more on that we can share at another time, but it is doable, and I recognize that smaller firms will have a greater challenge, but it is doable, and sometimes it calls for collaboration at the firm level.
Right. And Jennifer, you mentioned CIO and CISO throughout the presentation, and we can add a small V in front of that, a virtual CISO, a virtual CIO, and this is pretty much outsourcing that function to an organization where that is their business. Their business is to help smaller organizations, medium-sized organizations that cannot afford to, whether by virtue of department or by virtue of finances, cannot afford to bring that role on internally. They can outsource this to someone who has that expertise and who is in that business.
I'm still inviting questions from the participants. I think you've been so comprehensive that they don't have a lot of questions. But one issue that we also have very prevalent in the jurisdiction is that many of our organizations are multi-jurisdictional. And so security sometimes is breached with a branch outside the jurisdiction, and it impacts you. Can you address that issue as well?
Yes.
I'll let Greg answer, but I just want to preface it by saying some of your defense on that end will then be in containment. Once it has happened, how do you contain your local operation?
Right. So Jennifer, you mentioned earlier about looking at your partners and third parties, and on many levels, some of the local offices that are satellite offices, security is pushed from a central location down. And in pushing that security and those policies from centrally down, then they are, for want of a better word, forced to accept what they've been given. And the level of autonomy there is pretty much non-existent. So it's often difficult for a satellite office to affect something that happens at the head or an office closer to the head office. And maybe a little bit more autonomy or jurisdictional based policies can be adopted by these organizations because they're in essentially a different jurisdiction.
Are there regulators in jurisdiction? I know it's something that probably our regulators looking at in terms of setting up some requirements for security as part of your regulatory and your business continuity plans. But are there regulators that have in place these requirements as a regulatory requirement that you should have a certain level of security? And is that something that we should be looking at more closely?
Absolutely.
Well, in terms, you'll find there are a number of international regulatory organizations who have issued guidelines. The SEC in the US in particular is very well noted for issuing guidelines on disclosure requirements, for example, and what you need to say if you've been compromised and so on. And I think it's a very live issue. As we said in the beginning, cyber governance and cyber risk is at best an emerging discipline. And with the prevalence of that comes new bodies of work all the time in terms of what is the gold standard or what is the best practice for different industries. I would acknowledge that financial services in particular is very much hard hit by cyber risk and cyber threats. And so I think you'll continue to see new guidelines and new bodies of work around how they should be handled.
Right. And I think regulators in each jurisdictions are
going
to...
Why,
sorry? Oh, I was just going to add a bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay,
Alice.
sorry, go ahead. No,
So
I was saying the reason why I'm asking.
All right, let me take this. So jurisdictionally, it's going to always be that the regulators are taking a global standard and adapting it to their jurisdiction. So they're going to customize it to their jurisdiction and also to their sectors. But there's still going to be that base that has to go back to a global standard. Think GDPR. It's one of the closest things we have to a recent example of a global regulation that a lot of jurisdictions across the globe were forced to take on and to adopt and adapt.
Okay. We're on the hour, but just before you conclude and say your last words, just answer, I guess, this question. One of the things that we've seen, particularly during this global pandemic, is that many countries and even BVI, throughout the Caribbean, are offering people to come and reside in their particular country and work remotely from their particular countries. In the US, for example, I know if you work in certain industries, if you work in the banking industry, if you work in certain financial institutions, their regulators prohibit you from doing certain activities outside of the United States. How are we attracting, people to come and work in this jurisdiction remotely with, the whole, pandemic remote working and providing that level of security as a jurisdiction to attract persons to be able to have the confidence that they're working in a jurisdiction where they can work securely. And that's the last question, and I'll ask you to wrap up in answering that question.
I can speak from an operations side, Jen. So operationally, it's going to be up to the particular organization in terms of how it allows its users, its team to access corporate resources remotely, and what measures are in place. I mean, I know that in some cases, depending on where you are connecting from, you cannot access corporate assets, and that is irrespective of the jurisdiction itself's regulation. But the corporation has taken this position, you know, that if you are connecting from somewhere else, I mean, and you are not using, you know, for instance, a VPN, then you will not be allowed access. And even then, with a VPN, you have limited access as opposed to when you would be in the office. So you can access some resources, but not others.
I think just to wrap up, if that's where we're at, I think the important takeaways for today, and certainly that I would like participants to take away, is that the idea of managing cyber risk is about promoting resiliency. You want your organization to be around to fight another day. You want to protect your assets. You want to prepare for the eventuality that you will be compromised. And you want to do whatever is reasonable within the extent of your resources and your capabilities as an organization to prevent those attacks. So think resiliency, you know, try to assess where you're most vulnerable and what your most valuable assets are, and put your resources, limited though they may be, to protecting those.
Right. Prevent, protect, prepare.
Okay, the 3 Ps. And with that, I want to thank Jennifer and Greg for excellent and very informative presentation. Of course, this presentation will be available. We will circulate it to all the attendees and persons who want to view it, even if they have not attended. We want to thank you all also for attending today's BVI Finance and ISSA presentation on cybersecurity. They have been talking today about the whole cybersecurity chain.
Cyber kill chain, yes.
The cyber kill chain, you know,
Yes.
the cyber kill chain. And we see all the steps along that chain. And so we end with the PPP, as Greg said. So we will prepare and we will have our protect and prevent, and have our policies and procedures in place to ensure that, so I'm adding 2 more Ps, that we have the best chance of thwarting cyber attacks. This has been another BVI Finance Breakfast Forum. Thank you for joining us, and do have a pleasant day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.